Hello grade 8s and welcome to WorksheetCloud. I hope you're excited for this lesson and I hope that you're having a good day so far. If you have a question during our lesson, please make a note of it and then send us an email with that question to grade8@worksheetcloud.com. Today's lesson is going to be very exciting, and as you can see, it looks like it's going to be about a tree. Hello again, my name is Mrs. Goslet and I'll be teaching you poetry today. So I hope that you enjoy nature, or I don't know what it is about when I'd like to teach, but I always sneeze. So please ignore my previous sneezing fit there. Luckily I paused it in time, so you didn't have to tell me, bless you ma'am, but I know in my heart that you said bless you. Let's get into it. So poetry. Now most of you would have done a poem in grade 8, and poetry is important and the analysis of it. So we're going to look at this poem and we're going to break it down, and it's important when your teacher is teaching you a poem that you make note and you also learn a little bit about the poet. Most times we don't really talk about the poet, but our poet is called Thomas Hardy, and he was a novelist, a romanticist, and he also wrote poetry. And we're going to see, obviously it's a tree, so it must be about nature. So I'm excited to share with you this poem. I enjoy this poem, and it's also good to learn the skill of analyzing a poem and understanding its meaning. If you can understand the theme of a poem, you will be able to answer any question. Poetry is asked from grade 8 to grade 12, so it's not going away. Let's look at it. So I'm just recapping figures of speech because remember, they always use figures of speech in a poem to emphasize certain aspects, to just describe certain things a bit better. Instead of just saying the beach is cold, you can use an example like a simile, where you're comparing something to something else. Metaphor, a personification is quite nice to use. The sun is smiling, the waves are dancing, anything like that, just to give us a good visual image. Poetry also, you don't have to rhyme. You can have a free verse poem, but sometimes poets do use rhyme intentionally. Sometimes they'll use it in stanza 1 and 2, and in their last stanza they don't use it at all. And they're trying to drive home a message that in stanza 1 and 2 things are making sense. It's rhyming, there's structure, and then maybe in stanza 3, whatever the poem is about, maybe it's not making sense at all, and that's why there's no rhyme. So pick up on those sort of analysis pointers. So we're going to go through our poem. It's called Throwing a Tree. It was written by Thomas Hardy. The two executioners stalk along over the knolls, bearing 2 axes with heavy hands, shining and wide. A long, limp, 2-handed saw, toothed for cutting great bowls. And so they approached the proud tree that bears the death mark on its side. Jackets doffed, they swing axes and chop away just above ground. And the chips fly about and lie white on the moss and fallen leaves, till a broad, deep gash in the bark is shewn all way round. And one of them tries to hook upward rope, which at last he achieves. So let's look at the title of the poem. Usually the title of a poem will give away what the poem is about. And examiners love to ask, how does the title give context, or how does the title tie in with something else? So if we look at throwing, we think immediately of an action, to throw something. Now throwing a tree sounds like we're going to pick the tree up, literally, and throw it. But that's not the case. Throwing is actually also known as felling. Now, does anyone know what felling is? To fell a tree is to chop it down. Well done. So, throwing a tree means to chop a tree down. Now, most of you are like, yeah, so what? That's normal. You know, we use paper every day. We need to get it from somewhere. We know it comes from a tree. But Thomas Hardy is trying to show us how it seems like if you look at the words he uses, and we're going to look at the analysis, but executioners. Now, an executioner, we know, is someone who kills another person. But a tree is not a person. They're executing this tree. They use axes. There's a saw. They approach this proud tree, and there's a death mark. So when a person who wants to chop a tree down, they use, what's that machine called now? I don't want a chainsaw. I'm thinking of Texas Chainsaw Massacre now, where that is ridiculous. No, I mean, I haven't watched it, but I just know a man walks around with a chainsaw and he kills people. But anyway, crazy. So a chainsaw is a lot easier to cut on a tree, but they've also got here, they've got axes and a saw. You know, when you saw a tree down, it's a lot of hard work. So they mark a tree with an X or a line, and that's where they're going to chop it or cut it. So it seems like this poet is not happy with man or these men who are the executioners. He gives them a very negative connotation. We feel bad for the tree. He's trying to make us feel bad. And then he says here, one of them tries to hook upward rope. So they're throwing a rope around and they're going to pull this tree down. And it says, which at last he achieves. So he really brings this tree down. These are the first two stanzas, and I have left off the other two. I do apologize, but I'm going to read you the rest. It's quite impactful. The saw then begins till the top of the tall giant shivers. The shivers are seen to grow greater with each cut than before. They edge out the saw, tug the rope, but the tree only quivers. So he only shakes a little bit. All their hard work. Then lastly, the living mast sways. So they're comparing the tree to a mast of a sail, and it's swaying. And further sways with a shout, Job, and Ike rush aside. Reached the end of its long staying powers, the tree crashes downward. It shakes all its neighbors throughout, and 200 years steady growth has been ended in less than 2 hours. So I find that so impactful because we don't think about trees being cut down. We want the paper, we want all of that, but we don't actually go and kill the tree. And people always say, oh, you're killing so many trees, you must recycle. And that's so important. But when he says it like this, and you actually feel great sympathy and emotion for this tree who has now been there for 200 years it took to grow that tall. When they start trying to pull it down, it only shakes and shivers a little bit. But then after 2 hours, these men finally can get it down. So I really like that last line. I'm going to read it to you again. And 200 years steady growth has been ended in less than 2 hours. It is so impactful. But we're going to look at the analysis. So I explained to you to throw a tree is to fell a tree, which means to bring it down. And if you want to make notes about this, you're most welcome to. Maybe later on in the year, you guys actually do throwing a tree. The men carry heavy-handed axes, so they're big and a two-handled saw to the task. So remember I spoke about, two of you go and you saw, that long saw. They swing axes, they chop at the tree trunk just above the ground. So that death mark they've put so low, so they're going to cut so much of that tree down. Then they take this rope and they hook it on the tree and they pull it down and they start sawing, and finally this tree comes down. So Hardy, who's our poet, uses the word death mark for the painted or chalked mark. Remember I said it can be a white mark, or they take red and they mark it on the tree, so that identifies it for that tree they must cut down. The mark the fellas make in the bark is a broad, deep gash. So it almost seems like this tree is wounded. It's got a gash with its connotations of pain, and the tall giant shivers. So they're hurting this tree. And ironically, this is what I spoke about, 200 years steady growth has been ended in less than 2 hours. So there's this emphasis on the violence of man's actions against nature. And if I had never read this poem, I would never have thought about it like that. And he actually made me more aware of recycling, because we aren't really taught what happens with the process, and we know what happens with recycling. It's good for the environment, but it's so sad to see when you go to a forest and there's just no trees. Some people are very, very against using, I know this whole thing has come about, I know at school our environmentalist society has pushed for the using of no straws, and it became such a huge movement and campaign. And just by me going to a restaurant, I wasn't very good about it in the beginning, but when I watched that video where there's this turtle and there's a plastic straw stuck in his nostril and they take it out and then he breathes again, it just shows you how us, yes, we are making a clever invention like a plastic straw for when our beverages come to table and we can drink it like that. It's so, and this was written a long time ago, so I'm just talking about something that's more recent, the straws. And when you go to a restaurant and you have to drink through the glass, or they give you a carbon, I don't know what I'm talking about. Carbon, I don't know. Then it's, you get used to it, then you don't need a plastic straw. And also, one of my friends is a conservationist, and when we'd go and we had juice all together, and he would say to me, he'd make me feel so bad. He says, how can you use that straw? And it was just it was a habit. When I got my juice, I just opened the straw without even thinking, and then it was open, and he was like, no, you've ruined it already. So just little things like that. So this poem is showing that us as people are actually we're killing our environment, we're damaging it, and it shows you that we can't just say we're going to replant a tree and everything's going to be okay again. And we just have to do our parts. As much as you can do, make people aware and that type of thing. But this poem is beautiful. I love trees. Trees are stunning. So we're just going to look at the summary. So throwing a tree shows that nature plays victim to man and his ruthless pursuit of progress. So this poet is trying to show you that man is bad. They are executioners, they're murderers, they're killers. Thomas Hardy wants to express his anger. So we get the sense that there's this anger coming out towards the harm caused to nature by man's self-centered activities. So we're selfish. We don't need to take all the trees down, but we do it because we can. Thomas Hardy is against any kind of activity that causes nature to suffer and it shows through the pessimism that he expresses through people throwing trees. So pessimism, you know what optimism is? When you're optimistic, you're always looking on the bright side, you're always positive. But if you're pessimistic, you look at the day and go at the beginning and you say, it's not going to be a good day. And it hasn't even started. So he does not like people who hurt or harm nature. We're going to look at the structure. So you couldn't see the structure so nicely in a PowerPoint. It's quite difficult to do it. And I did leave out 2 stanzas. But if you Google it, you'll definitely be able to see the actual 4 stanzas. And remember, in poetry, we call a stanza, that's what a paragraph is. And it's important to know the difference, because a lot of time they make reference to stanza 1 and stanza 2, or line 1 and 2, and then they want you to identify or answer the question in that regard. So the lines are similar in length, so he did that on purpose. And then there's a regular rhyming pattern, so I'm going to read that to you. So knolls and bowls rhyme, wide and side rhyme, ground and wood rhyme, leaves and achieves rhymes, shivers, quivers, before, more, shout, throughout, powers, 2 hours. So there's a definite rhyme scheme, definite regular rhyming pattern, and that's what it looks like. I just read the 2 lines that rhyme together so that you could hear it. And let's look at the tone and the mood. So it's important to know the difference. Mood is the atmosphere that you feel, that there's this destructive, man has just come to destroy. And then the tone that we get is, it's very depressing, it's sad. You feel very sorry for the trees. Then the theme, I just love this picture. This picture would make such a lovely creative writing topic, because if you look, this is what it once used to look like, and how there's no tree in sight. Something that's just so stunning. Not the destruction, but it can elicit such a lovely essay, creative writing. Look at the trucks just come on his daily chore, come to load up all the logs to go on the back, to be made for furniture. Who knows? But I do, yeah. So theme is, what is the overall message the poet is trying to convey? So man is destroying nature, or man's destruction. So we're looking for something along those lines. Now, diction is the word choice. So this poet, he didn't say there are 2 men, their job is to cut trees down, and he paints them as murderers. So executioner. So the diction is the word choice. This poet specifically used this word to show the pain that they're going to inflict. They're murderers, they're killers. Just here, like that, this tree has a big, sorry, not gosh. It means gash. I do apologize. So they use very descriptive words, kneeling and sawing. So you can see it's really taxing on them to take this tree down. It's not easy. They have to use 2 axes, and it's got very heavy heads. So it's a heavy axe. It's a hard work. It's hard manual labor, but they've come to do it in any way. All right, imagery. So we're just going to look at here. So these executioners are about to destroy a tree or nature. The proud tree. So it shows that this tree's been there for a long time. It's deeply rooted. You know how the roots go all along the bottom of the soil. It's standing straight up and it's firm in the ground. So there's nothing wrong with it. I love it. It's a proud tree. The tree experiences a slow death. So they talk about these chops fly about. So it's those pieces and chips of the bark and the wood of the tree. Talks about here, I've actually got it right for once. Broad, deep gash. And line 10 and 11 talks about the men battle to saw the tree. They've got 2 axes. They've got that other 2-man saw that they're using. It takes them long. I know 2 hours doesn't seem that long, but if you think about the amount of trees that they had marked and they still have to get to, it's hard. It's difficult. Long staying powers. The tree is old and has been part of nature for a long time. Right, before you go, we just did a little bit of analysis. There's way more we could go into, but we learned about throwing a tree. Hopefully you learned something new, that felling and throwing a tree means to actually chop a tree down. There will be an activity on this poem for you to do after this. And again, if you have any questions, grade 8s, please send us a message at grade8@WorksheetCloud.com. I hope you enjoyed my lesson and that you learned something about poetry. We're going to do our quote of the day. There are no limits to what you can accomplish, except the limits you place on your own thinking. And sometimes we are our own worst enemies. We tell ourselves to doubt ourselves, we're not good enough. That little voice in our head is saying, you can't do it. But then this mouth tells that voice, no, I can do it. I really hope that you enjoyed yourself, and thank you again for being with me and watching me, grade 8s. I've thoroughly enjoyed teaching you. This lesson was brought to you by Worksheet Cloud. I'll check you soon.